Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, I want to talk about the Timberwolves lineup versatility this year, and especially including an under-the-radar acquisition that the Timberwolves made. We haven't, frankly, talked enough about. And according to some of the Wolves lineup data last year, it makes a ton of sense to replace, in particular, one of the players that is no longer with the team. So I want to talk about the depth, the versatility, under-the-radar addition, and how some of these lineups and how the rotation could shake out this year. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day, everybody. And a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as anywhere you listen to your podcasts, from Apple to Google. You can also find us, of course, on Spotify, Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves and at BBeacon with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so today on the show, plenty to talk about. I want to dig into rotations, lineup versatility, and an under-the-radar acquisition that we haven't talked enough about on this show. After digging into some of the lineup data a bit more from last year, I think it's pretty clear why the Wolves made this particular addition to their roster. So let's start with the rotation. Oh, and I guess a quick housekeeping / schedule note. The Timberwolves Summer League team had Monday and Tuesday off. Plays Wednesday afternoon, so this afternoon at 3 p.m. Central, and then again plays late Thursday, I think 9 p.m. Central on Thursday. So Thursday show, Friday show, we'll do at least a couple segments on Summer League and what's ongoing with Wendell Moore and Spaniolo and Josh Minott and some of those guys in Summer League. So more Summer League talk to come. But today I want to dig into the quote unquote real Timberwolves, if you will, what the roster will look like this fall, or I should say what the rotations might look like this fall. And as much as I think that the exercise of like assigning minutes, I know this is fun to do in on blogs or in comment sections or on Twitter or whatever, like, hey, this guy will play this many minutes and this guy will play this many minutes. And, you know, putting the little number like directly next to the player's name and looking at the depth chart. And that's fun to do because when you play NBA 2K, you've got to assign those minutes anyway. And you know, I don't know, who knows? Maybe the coaching staffs actually do kind of sketch that out a little bit. It never is quite that clean, but I want to try and parse it a little bit. What some of the rotation, some of the lineups could look like, some of the pairings on the court, some of the different backcourt and frontcourt looks, and why they should work together. So, I think it's pretty obvious the starting lineup is D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards at the 2. Jaden McDaniels will almost certainly start at the 3 for the Wolves this year. Of course, he mostly came off the bench last year. And then Karl-Anthony Towns will start at the 4, Rudy Gobert at the 5. I think we can all agree that the most likely second line is Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, and to some extent Naz Reid. Now, it'll be interesting to see how that gets staggered, and perhaps some of those bench lineups have more shooters and maybe less Naz, and Bryn Forbes gets added. But at the moment, I think Bryn Forbes is the 11th guy. We'll talk more about Forbes later. I do want to get into that acquisition, and one of the reasons why I think the Wolves went that route, beyond the obvious Tim Connolly connection. Well, I shouldn't say beyond. That's certainly part of it, regardless, no matter how you slice it. But I want to talk a little bit about Forbes later, so that's a little bit of a tease to later in the show. And Wendell Moore is not going to be in the rotation from day one, I don't think. I think that this team is deep enough that's not necessary. And you're also looking at guys like Taurean Prince and Kyle Anderson that can both defend and play the 3 and the 4 offensively and defensively. Naz Reid, you know, I don't know what those minutes are going to look like for Naz if the Wolves keep 2 of Towns, Gobert, and Naz on the floor at most times. I don't know that that's feasible, but Naz at least gives them the option to do that. And that doesn't include Nate Knight, who very likely will be back either as a two-way player, one of the last guys on the roster. Remember, the Wolves extended a qualifying offer to him, and so he currently is a restricted free agent. So there's depth to this team for sure. I think at the moment, you have to assume that Jordan McLaughlin's getting the majority of the backup point guard minutes. with Jalen Noel kind of the third guard, right? If there's foul trouble or anything like that, if D'Lo goes out early in a game with foul trouble, if he misses a game due to injury, Jordan McLaughlin slots in at 25, 28 minutes in that scenario, and Jalen Noel is playing 15 to 20 minutes at the point. Now, Bryn Forbes can also play the point. So I think in that scenario, if it's on a game-to-game basis, if Russell misses a couple of games, I think Bryn Forbes is also playing some point guard along with Jalen Noel. But Jalen's effectively your third point guard in this scenario. And he's also backing up Anthony Edwards at the 2. Bryn Forbes plays into that as well. So you've got those two positions at point guard and shooting guard. You've got D'Lo and Ant playing the heavy minutes, McLaughlin and Jalen Noel as your primary backups, and Bryn Forbes with the ability to play both roles. So Noel and Forbes are your two combo guards. And that's kind of your depth in the backcourt. I want to get into the specific lineups and pairings here, especially related to Jalen Noel and Jordan McLaughlin, because I think the Wolves clearly looked at their backcourt and said, hey, we have four guys that we really like. Obviously D'Lo, obviously Anthony Edwards, and then McLaughlin and Noel. I mean, by trading Malik Beasley and by not making a key acquisition at point guard, by not drafting a point guard, the Wolves obviously put a stamp of endorsement on Jordan McLaughlin, and to some extent, Jalen Noel. Now, much was made about Chris Finch's, I guess it was post-draft, pre-Gobert trade comments, including Jalen Noel in the core with Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards in the same breath as that core, which perhaps tipped their hand a bit that they were looking to create some additional opportunities for Noel. Actually, I think Finch said that they wanted to create more opportunities for him. And by trading Malik Beasley, they did just that. So the backcourt, they obviously feel great about McLaughlin and Noel. So I want to dig into that lineup data in just a minute here and why I think that is, because it's actually pretty clear if you look at the lineup data. In terms of the front court, it's extremely long. And I mean, McDaniels, Towns, Gobert as your front court is massive. And then you bring Kyle Anderson off the bench, who's primarily going to be your backup 4. I think he'll effectively be the sixth man this year. I know we think of the sixth. I mean, you could call a six-man off the bench scorer, which obviously then would be Jalen Noel. But in terms of the bench player that sees the most minutes, I think it's Kyle Anderson, because I think he backs up Towns at the 4. I think he plays the 4 when Towns slots to the 5. I think he could play the 3 if McDaniels gets into foul trouble. But in some form or fashion, Prince and Anderson are your primary backups at the forward positions. They could both play the 3. They could both play the 4. They could both, Prince is obviously the better shooter. Anderson's the better overall defender, but they're both good defenders. They both can shoot the 3, even if Anderson's a little below league average there and not super comfortable doing it. They also could both initiate offense in a pinch too. They could essentially play point forward. We saw that happen with Prince last year sometimes when the Wolves were a bit shorthanded, and Kyle Anderson has done that throughout his career as well, initiated for himself and others in his very unique slow-mo fashion. But both of those guys are going to see 18 to 22 minutes off the bench on a nightly basis. I truly believe. I think Kyle Anderson will be more in the 22 to 24 range. Prince may be more in the 16, 18 minute range, but they're both going to see plenty of run. And I think the biggest question is, are the Wolves going to stagger Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert's minutes where one of them is on the court at basically all times, or are they going to be less, I guess make a less concerted effort to do that and just kind of, if foul trouble is not a factor in any given game, which it almost always is with Towns, I mean, if we're being honest, then what does Naz's role look like? If they're not staggering them, then he's got to play 10, 12 plus minutes a game, especially if you're trying to play Towns and Gobert together for a big chunk of time. But if they do stagger them, they could both play north of 30 minutes a game, and then Kyle Anderson's playing quite a bit at the 4, and Naz could play some at the 5 as well. Nate Knight could also play both the 4 and the 5 too. So I'm going to be really interested to watch that and how much is dictated by matchups versus, you heard Finch and Tim Connolly say to the media already this offseason. Connolly said something to the effect of, teams aren't necessarily just going small. They go small when their bigs aren't as good as the other team's bigs, and our bigs are the best, essentially, which is absolutely true to an extent. But will that happen against Golden State? Will that happen against Cleveland? Will that happen against, or I guess Cleveland's the opposite example. Well, I was thinking of teams that actually do play their bigs all the time, which is Cleveland. Will it work against Golden State? Will it work against other teams that are going to try and go small against the Wolves? I don't know. Will the Wolves, how are they going to handle that? That's the biggest question, I think, headed into next year. But they've got the pieces to be able to play small too, because you could play Towns at the 5, which is what he's done his whole career, and play Kyle Anderson or Taurean Prince at the 4, or Jaden McDaniels at the 4. So you have the ability to do it. and then add shooters on the floor. Slide McDaniels up to the 4 and play Edwards at the 3 and Noel or Bryn Forbes at the 2. Like, there's some stuff you can do with this lineup that's really fascinating. But what I want to spend most of the rest of the time today focusing on is some of those bench combinations, or I should say, really combining those bench players with the starters and what those combinations could look like. And the surprising addition, or the surprising, I think, impact of the addition of Bryn Forbes, which I want to get into that a bit more too, because the more I looked at the data, the more intriguing it really is. But first, let's talk about our friends over at Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have a computer with access to rockauto.com both at home and in your pocket. You could save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers now for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything you could possibly need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil to even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we say you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, let's talk about this bench unit for the Wolves. So, like the straight bench unit, the 5 reserves is Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, Naz Reid. We're not ever going to see that line. I shouldn't say ever. We're not often going to see that lineup because why would you not stagger your best players? Obviously, right? Those are kind of your straight backups, with Forbes being the next guy. What I think is really interesting is looking back at some of the lineup combinations from last season with both Jalen Noel and Jordan McLaughlin, because again, like I said at the top of the show, the Wolves are making a bet on those guys. They essentially planted a flag with their backup point guard or backup backcourt, I should say, last year, minus Malik Beasley. They took out the highest usage guy, or the highest profile guy, the best shooter, and they said, we really like Jordan McLaughlin and we really like Jalen Noel, and we think this is going to work. Well, let's start here. Jalen Noel and Anthony Edwards, I think, could play a fair amount together in the backcourt. Now, their net rating together, they played actually 308 minutes together last year, Noel and Ant, in terms of two-man lineups. They were only a plus 0.4, so they were barely a net positive in those 308 minutes. You would think that would work really well. And now, to be clear, those weren't all minutes with like Noel at the point and Ant at the 2. I'm sure there definitely were moments added in there with D'Angelo Russell running point or Jordan McLaughlin running point. We'll get more to McLaughlin here in a minute. But Noel and Ant backcourts make a lot of sense. If you play Noel at the backup point, if you let him operate things, Ant can obviously do the same thing. You could add some shooting with Forbes, and then you could effectively have Forbes and Noel in the backcourt and Ant at the 3. If you play Jordan McLaughlin and Bryn Forbes together a lot, that's a pretty small lineup. Like, for instance, Jordan McLaughlin and Jalen Noel played together quite a bit last year. They were a slight net positive, a plus 1.3. But I'd worry about a Jordan McLaughlin, Bryn Forbes backcourt. So I think some combination of Jalen Noel and Anthony Edwards, you add in Bryn Forbes maybe to help initiate things. That could be a really interesting and potent backcourt with a ton of shooting. I mean, Ant has unlimited range. The shot's only going to get better. He's obviously only slightly above league average in terms of percentage, but teams are worried about him scoring at all levels, and the step back 3, the just sheer range that he could shoot with. Jalen Noel's an improving. We knew he could shoot based on G League and college numbers, but he's improving at the NBA level. And of course, Bryn Forbes is a career 41% 3-point shooter. So that would be a really dynamic backcourt with the ability of Noel and Ant to both attack, the ability of all 3 of those guys to shoot the 3. Again, you're giving up some stuff in regards to size, but I mean, how is that much different than what the Wolves did a lot of last year? If you're putting Ant at the 3, right? He mostly played the 3 for long stretches last season. He started at the 3 last season. So I think that's really interesting. And in this scenario, Forbes is essentially taking on the Malik Beasley role. More on that in a second. Next, in terms of lineups, let's look at this trio. Well, actually, yeah. Let's get back to that in a second. Let's skip to Jordan McLaughlin real quick. McLaughlin and Ant together played 327 minutes. McLaughlin and Ant as a two-man lineup, they were a plus 11.9, which is a really, really good mark in a lot of minutes, 327 minutes. So the J-Mac Anthony Edwards pairing was far better than the Jalen Noel Anthony Edwards pairing. Now, in a second I want to look at the three of them together. But interesting that when McLaughlin and Ant were on the floor together, the higher usage player, Ant, obviously had a ton of success, and McLaughlin was able to just kind of do his thing, which is initiate offense, occasionally knock down a spot up three from the corner, attack and drive and kick a little bit. He does that a little better than D'Angelo Russell, frankly. And also the defensive support of having Jordan McLaughlin with Anthony Edwards. We know Ant's a good on-ball defender, but McLaughlin's also a really pesky on-ball defender and can take on the opposing point guard, whereas then Ant can guard the most dynamic wing for the opposing team. He's much better on the ball, Ant is, than off the ball. So the McLaughlin-Ant pairing is really interesting. I mentioned McLaughlin and Noel already. Here's the interesting thing. If you look at the five-man lineups from last year, and you just look at the Jordan McLaughlin lineup, so all five-man lineups with Jordan McLaughlin in them, what were his best lineups? And I also removed all lineups that played under 20 minutes together, which obviously the more, I don't, if you're not familiar with working with the lineup data on NBA, I should say NBA.com, the less players in the lineups, if you're looking at two-man, three-man, obviously there's less options, right? So you get up to five-man lineups, and there's a ton of lineups that played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes together. So I sorted by lineups that played 20 minutes or more together. The best Jordan McLaughlin lineups, almost all of them, include players that are still with the team today, except for Malik Beasley. So Jordan McLaughlin's best lineup was Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Malik Beasley, Taurean Prince, Karl-Anthony Towns. Beasley's the only guy on that list that's no longer with this team. His next best lineup, the same thing, except for it was Naz Reid instead of Karl-Anthony Towns. Otherwise, the same lineup. McLaughlin, Beasley, Noel, Prince, Naz Reid. The lineup after that is the exception. It's also got Jared Vanderbilt in that lineup. But then you keep going on down the list. The one after that on this list, it's Russell, Beasley, Prince, McLaughlin, Reid. And then it's Beasley, Prince, McLaughlin, Reid, Anthony Edwards. And then the next lineup has Towns, Beasley, McLaughlin, Edwards, McDaniels. The point here is Beasley and McLaughlin played really well together last year. Remove Beasley, insert Bryn Forbes. The rest of that lineup is the same. The Wolves looked at this and said the profile of Malik Beasley fits the rest of this lineup, the other four guys in this lineup, and fits Jordan McLaughlin extremely well. If Malik Beasley is being traded, how will we replace Malik Beasley in these lineups? Because we know McLaughlin can have success with a bunch of high-usage guys around him. So, like, for instance, his best lineup, Karl-Anthony Towns, Malik Beasley, Jalen Noel. Those guys are getting all the shots in that lineup. The lineup after that, Malik Beasley, Jalen Noel, I guess those would be the two that would be getting all the shots, because otherwise you have Naz and you have Taurean Prince in that lineup. There's a couple lineups on here with D'Angelo Russell. Same idea. A couple lineups on here with Anthony Edwards. Same idea. Pairing Jordan McLaughlin with these lineups where he doesn't have to do too much offensively, can focus on being a pest defensively, and be the straw that stirs the drink on offense. But specifically the backcourt profile of Malik Beasley is an absolutely perfect fit next to Jordan McLaughlin. So what I want to do next is I want to compare Bryn Forbes and Malik Beasley. There's a ton of similarities there that are really easy to gloss over if you're just thinking like, oh, okay, low usage combo guard, bench guy for playoff teams, Bryn Forbes, and then Malik Beasley, who averaged 20 points a game in a Wolves uniform up until last year. Sharpshooter guy, scored like crazy when he was in the starting lineup for the Wolves. You think of them differently. They're not all that different if you look at their actual profiles, their careers to this point. And it's very clear what the Wolves are trying to do with Forbes as a plug-and-play replacement for Malik Beasley. So we'll get to that here next. It's really, really interesting. But first, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball, which is just about to head to the All-Star break here next week, with, of course, the Twins still in first place, as well as all of your, summer league action. We're less than a month away from the start of preseason NFL football, believe it or not. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, let's get into this Bryn Forbes, Malik Beasley comparison. This is really fascinating. I don't know. It just didn't stick out to me when they first signed Forbes. But if you look at these two guys together, I'll tell you what I did. I went to Basketball Reference and I used the compare players tool for Beasley and Forbes. And some things are relatively uncanny. So I'll start with the things that are important, and then I'll talk about some of the weird stuff. The 3-point rate and also the 3-point effectiveness. Malik Beasley, to this point in his career, 58.8% of his shot attempts at the NBA level have been 3-pointers. So we'll call it 59%. Bryn Forbes, 56.4%. So similar 3-point rates within 2.4% of each other for their careers. 3-point effectiveness, Malik Beasley is 38.6%. Bryn Forbes is 41.3% for his career. So Beasley shot a few more threes. Forbes has been a little bit more accurate, 41% versus 38.5% Forbes to Beasley. So the Wolves are getting a guy who is a off-the-ball catch-and-shoot, spot-up shooter who's more effective than Malik Beasley in that role. That is the most important thing. But look at some of the other stuff. Look at some of the ancillary stuff. Well, I should also mention the usage rate. Beasley's usage rate is over 20%, which means 1/5 of the possessions that occur when Beasley's on the floor, offensive possessions, were used by Malik Beasley. Bryn Forbes is a tick below that at 18.3%. Their assist rate is almost identical. Neither one of those guys are Bryn Forbes has played a little bit of point guard. He has the ability to initiate a little bit, but neither one is like necessarily a pick and roll ball handler. Malik Beasley is mostly shooting the ball in catch and shoot situations, scoring in transition, or scoring as a cutter. Forbes is mostly a catch and shoot guy with some ability to create off the dribble, maybe a little more so than Malik Beasley. But all the other stuff kind of falls in line. The free throw rate, very similar, both very low. Forbes is maybe a little bit higher. Just straight up field goal percentage, which matters a lot less than 3-point percentage and true shooting and effective field goal percentage. Straight up field goal percentage, they're both Beasley's 43% for his career. Forbes is 43.8%. Effective field goal percentage, Beasley's 54.4%. Forbes is 55.4%. True shooting percentage, Beasley's 56.1%. Forbes is 57.4%. Nearly identical shooting percentages across the board. The free throw percentage, even though neither of these guys shoots that many free throws, is within 0.04%. Forbes is 82%. Beasley's 81.6%. All of those things are almost identical. Again, the assist rate almost identical. They both came to the league in the same year in 2017. The point here is the Wolves traded out a highly effective, high volume, spot up shooter. That was the role Malik Beasley was in, right? He wasn't going to be a starter with this team. If he wasn't traded, the Wolves had found a way to get Gobert without trading Beasley. It doesn't matter. Malik Beasley's not starting over D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards. Jalen Noel, the Wolves figured out, could do more. I'm not saying that in a vacuum, Noel's a better player than Beasley right now, although you could make that argument. That's not what I'm trying to do today, though. But Noel can do more. He can initiate offense. He can score at all three levels. Beasley doesn't. He scores in transition. He's a spot-up shooter. He's a little bit of a movement shooter. He could do all those things, but the versatility isn't there. So they said we could replace Beasley with somebody who isn't expecting to have this bigger role. Malik Beasley wants to have a bigger role. And frankly, he's got the athletic ability. He's got some tools to be a starter on a good team in this league. And we've seen that. We saw that with an improving Wolves team. He was a rotation guy in a playoff team with Denver. But Forbes can do the majority of the same things Beasley can do. He's not quite as big. He's not quite as athletic. These things are all true. But the output is essentially the same with lower expectations and lower salary. Bryn Forbes is coming in for a couple $1 million. Beasley's making what? 16, 18, something like that. 18 million, I think. Beasley wants to be a starter. Beasley has these expectations to be more than a role player. Bryn Forbes was a role player on a championship team a couple years ago in Milwaukee. He played for Greg Popovich in San Antonio. He played for Michael Malone last year in Denver for a little while. He knows what his role is. He makes a lot less money, and the output is going to be the same, if not better. He shot 41%. He's shot 41+% for his career. Beasley's under 39%. But otherwise, they're essentially the same guy in terms of what the output, what the end result of what they do is. So the Wolves, going back to last segment in the 5-man lineups, they're looking at these lineups and saying, oh, okay, we've still got Towns, we've still got Prince, we've still got Noel, we've still got McLaughlin. Let's plug Forbes into that Beasley role. Or, look at any of these other, look at the top 10 lineups with Jordan McLaughlin. 9 of them have Malik Beasley, and then 3 other guys, in addition to Beasley and McLaughlin, that are still with the team. Plug Bryn Forbes into the Malik Beasley role, and you've got yourself a plus net rating lineup mostly off your bench with a combination of bench and starters. A Jordan McLaughlin lineup. And McLaughlin's going to get more consistent minutes. He's not the third string point guard anymore. He is the backup point guard. He is the backup to D'Angelo Russell. He's going to play heavy minutes. The Wolves saw the Beasley-McLaughlin pairing and how successful it was and said, lower cost, lower expectation for the player. Not in a bad way, but knowing his role, effectively the same output, the same end result. We'll plug Bryn Forbes into the Malik Beasley role and get exactly what we want this year. So that is what the Wolves are trying to get out of Bryn Forbes, is exactly what they got out of Malik Beasley, but at a higher success rate and without some of the other stuff. Obviously, I'm not even including any of the off-the-court things. By all accounts, Malik Beasley was a great teammate. All that stuff hopefully is behind him. But there isn't any of those question marks with Bryn Forbes. And again, the history of who he's played for, the teams he's played for, championship team in Milwaukee, Greg Popovich in San Antonio for several years, and then Michael Malone last year in Denver. Obviously, Tim Connolly traded for him in Denver last year too. So the bet is he could do 95% of what Malik Beasley can do and shoot the 3 better, which is the most important thing that Malik Beasley did. And you're paying him a fraction of the dollars. The expectations, Forbes knows exactly what he's getting into, and you're creating more opportunity for Jalen Noel. So that is what the Bryn Forbes acquisition is all about. And that is what the Wolves bench is going to look like with Forbes replacing Beasley's role, but Noel getting an increase in playing time. And it's going to be fascinating to watch how Chris Finch we know he's somebody who is not afraid to shake up his rotation. He's less rigid with his substitution patterns like we might have seen with Ryan Saunders or Tom Thibodeau. It's not the same thing every night. Chris Finch is going to give guys an opportunity. I mean, we saw games last year where Taurean Prince didn't get off the bench at all. And then he ended up, obviously, bringing him back on an extension and knowing he's going to be a big part of this rotation this year. Finch is going to try and push the right buttons and not get locked into a specific rotation. And so that's why both Jalen Noel and Bryn Forbes are going to be really important to this bench unit this season. All right, that's all we have for you today on the show. Of course, we'll talk Summer League on Thursday and Friday. Thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at bbeacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. That's all we have for you today. Again, of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And a reminder, for your second listen, you can listen to the Locked On NBA show. You can get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.